Harvard Divinity School.
Plant Animism in Western Amazonia, a Personal Chronicle, February 17th, 2024.
Good morning. Thank you for your patience. Good morning and welcome. My name is Charles Stang. I have the great privilege of serving as the director of the Center for the Study of World Religions here at Harvard Divinity School, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our second annual conference on psychedelics and spirituality. This conference and the Center's broader programming on psychedelics and spirituality is made possible by the very generous gift of the Gracias Family Foundation, which gift has allowed the university to establish this year the Harvard Study of Psychedelics in Society and Culture. The Center for the Study of World Religions is delighted to be a part of this cross-campus collaboration, and we want to acknowledge and thank our partners, the Mahindra Humanities Center and the Petrie Flom Center for Healthcare Policy at the Harvard Law School. This conference would not be possible without the help of a lot of dedicated and talented colleagues, staff, and students alike. First, I want to acknowledge and thank my closest colleagues, Gosia Skladowska, the Associate Director of the Center, and Lori Sedgwick, the Center's Events Coordinator. Gosia and Lori, would you mind standing so we can give you a warm round of applause? This is Gosia. And Lori's in the back behind the camera. Thank you both. I'd also like to thank two of our student research assistants, Tristan Angieri and LJ Matthews, and all the other student volunteers who have pitched in to make today a success. A special word of thanks also to Katie Caponera in the Office of Student Life here at the Divinity School, and also to our colleagues in the Facilities Department and in the media team, especially Bob DeVoe and Robbie Rhodes, who is behind the camera today. Thank you, Robbie, and thank you all for your support today. This conference is part of the Center's years-long interest in and investment in the intersection of psychedelics and religion. The Center hosts a bi-weekly reading group led by Jeffrey Breaux and Paul Gillis-Smith, titled Psychedelics, Sacred and Subversive. The Center also hosts an online speaker series called Psychedelics and the Future of Religion. And we're launching a new series this spring in collaboration with our colleagues at the law school on psychedelics and ethics. And the Center's also working with colleagues in the Office of Ministry Studies here at the Divinity School to develop opportunities for student fieldwork in psychedelic chaplaincy. Gosia will tell you a bit more about those opportunities at the end of today's conference. The Center's programming in psychedelics and spirituality is part of our broader initiative called Transcendence and Transformation, or T&T for short. And I want to thank Elizabeth Rovera and Brian O'Kelly for their generous support of T&T. It was their original gift that allowed the initiative to get off the ground several years ago. Later today, we will hear from Professor Carl Hart about the dangers of psychedelic exceptionalism. I, too, want to caution us against a kind of psychedelic exceptionalism, but of another sort. I remain convinced that from the perspective of the history of religions, psychedelics are most interesting and most significant as one among many different means and modes of exploring what I call transcendence and transformation. To put that another way, I'm interested in the transcendence of our normal states of being, perception, consciousness, and embodiment, and the ways that transcendence affords the transformation of the individual, group, and society. I'm interested in psychedelics as one among many catalysts for transcendence and transformation. And I don't believe they're necessarily the golden road, but rather one path, or rather a set of paths, for psychedelics are not a highway, but a web of paths, each with its own individual qualities and character, and paths that may lead to different destinations. I prefer to think of psychedelics as one among many ecstatic practices, practices that usher us outside our accustomed states of being and understanding and invite us into new relationships with ourselves, our fellow humans, and our more than human or other than human neighbors, including the Earth's plant, fungal, and animal life, but also those elusive entities we call, for better or worse, spirits, angels, demons, and gods, visible and invisible, real and imagined, malevolent and benign. These are practices that allow us to experience differently the relationship between mind and matter, spirit and flesh, what we assert is animate and what we allege is inert. I'd like to welcome and thank our two keynote speakers, Dr. Luis Eduardo Luna and Professor Carl Hart, who will be joining us later. Jeff and Paul will introduce our keynote speakers. I'd also like to welcome and thank all of the other panelists, workshop leaders, and finally, you, the audience, both here in person and online, for joining us on this cold and cloudy February. would that it be September. Although that would mean the start of the academic year, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Okay. This conference follows on the heels of last year's conference entitled Explorations in Interdisciplinary Psychedelic Research, held on a slightly warmer and sunnier Saturday in April. Both conferences were largely conceived and executed by my colleagues Jeffrey Breaux and Paul Gillis-Smith, who are both graduate students here at Harvard Divinity School and research assistants at the Center for the Study of World Religions. It's my pleasure to introduce them now. Jeffrey Breaux's work focuses on novel psychedelic spiritualities and psychedelic chaplaincy. His current project is an ethnography of self-identified spiritual but not religious practitioners who use psychedelics in so-called recreational or recreation settings as part of their spiritual practice. Prior to Harvard, Jeffrey managed an ashram in New Mexico, and before that, he was a project manager at Google. Okay, that wasn't intended to get laughs, but I'm happy for it. Paul Gillis-Smith primarily works at the intersections of religion and psychopharmaceutical medicine. Paul's currently developing a spiritual care protocol for ketamine infusion therapy at Brigham and Women's Faulkner Hospital here in Boston. He's also presented research on Maria Sabina, the MEQ, or Mystical Experience Questionnaire, and an immanent philosophical paradigm for mysticism. It was a delight to work with you both this year on this conference. I'm deeply grateful for your judgment, your expertise, and your leadership in this space. So would you all please join me in thanking Jeff and Paul for bringing us all together today. The floor is yours.
Well, hello. My name's Jeffrey Breaux. I have the winding path here before you all, and it is truly a pleasure. On behalf of Paul and myself, I want to just welcome you all again to Harvard Divinity School and the Psychedelic Intersections Conference. When Paul and I were planning last year's conference, the first annual psychedelics conference here, I remember telling him that I would be excited if we had 20 people attending. It is truly thrilling to see now as the conference enters its second year and we have over 1,000 participants, both in person and online. I truly could not be more gratified and thrilled to be here with you all. I need to extend additional thanks. I first want to begin by thanking Professor Stang for his leadership and support and for making all of this possible. I also need to thank Gosha Sklodowska and Lori Sedgwick and the rest of the CSWR team for all of their support and help. Thanks also to the deans and the faculty at the Divinity School, and to all of the HDS staff supporting us here today and throughout the weeks leading up to this conference. Special thanks also to all of our speakers whose scholarship truly makes this event possible. And finally, a deep thanks to all of you, again, for joining us in the audience and online. I'm someone who truly believes that the conversations happening here today matter. They matter for the field of psychedelic studies, and they matter for the world beyond these walls. it's gratifying to know that there are so many of us working in so many different areas who are all committed to a more just, equitable, and collaborative future. After last year's Harvard-focused conference, Paul and I knew we wanted this year's event to encompass the wider world of psychedelic spiritualities, with an eye in particular towards communities and practices that were historically left out of the academic discourse. We debated different ways that we could frame such an expansive focus for a conference, and we landed on the image of an intersection. Intersections are pivotal points where paths, people, and ideas converge. Psychedelics are intrinsically intersectional. What is a psychedelic experience but an intersection of self and substance? As a field, our research constantly pushes us to cross disciplines, modalities, temporalities, and beliefs. And the potential and peril of these chemicals calls us into collaboration to enlarge our perspective and sharpen our understanding. Hence, today we want to be attuned not only to intersections, but to intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality urges us to deepen our awareness of the power and privilege in spaces like ours here, where many spheres of experience meet. Our intersections present opportunities for change and exchange. These crossings have the potential to be generative, to be destructive, and to be transformative. The mission statement of the Divinity School calls us to act in service of a just world, at peace across religious and cultural divides. This is obviously work in progress. But psychedelics have long sat at the nexus of different perspectives, traditions, and disciplines. To recognize this and to work with it as such is a critical step, one I think should afford us some optimism. We hope that today's Psychedelic Intersections conference carries this spirit, a sense of optimistic intersecting, and the recognition that such optimism must be grounded in critical awareness, diverse voices, and active collaboration across difference. As conference organizers, we will continue to push ourselves to do better, to deepen our relationships, to improve our processes, and to put our words into action. And we hope that all of you will join us at the crossroads to do the same. Thank you very much, and with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Paul.
Hello, my friends. I am Paul Gillis-Smith. I'm a grad student here, Harvard Divinity, co-conspirator with Jeffrey on all things drugs and religion. As we open our event today, I want to remind us all that Harvard University is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. And if you have the resources today, while reparations and rematriation remain largely theoretical at the institutional level, I implore you to donate to organizations supporting the living Indigenous communities here in Massachusetts, like the North American Indian Center of Boston and the Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness, as acknowledgement does little to change material conditions, and such a donation is honestly the least one could do beyond such an acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of the Indigenous people from whom this land was taken is indeed imperative for an event dedicated to psychedelic scholarship. Many of these chemicals now used in research are only known to the labs and clinics today through acts of cultural theft from myriad American Indigenous peoples, North, Central, and Southern, the Nawa, Mazatec, Huichol, Tarahumara, Shipibo, Mayan, to name but a few, as well as the Punu and Mitsogo peoples of Central West Africa and the peoples of Western Africa. And the list goes on of Indigenous communities from around the world that scientific research has extracted, quote, novel organic life for their own sake and with little regard for reparation. Our work and our interest in psychedelics must confront the harm done to communities who stewarded these plants and fungi for millennia. And it is a concern that I ask that we hold in our minds and our bodies throughout this event and when we return to our research and our practice. I would be remiss to not also acknowledge the 350,000 brothers and sisters of ours who are currently incarcerated for drug-related offenses. The mere existence of an event like this, highlighting the groundbreaking research on psychedelics and religion, reinforces a myth, the myth being the war on drugs has ended. An event like this also contributes to the argument that there is a class of drugs that is exceptional, separate and apart from the rest. It also obfuscates the turf on which the war on drugs was staged and waged, along a color line, along lines of class, and in an attempt to stamp out the anti-war movement of the 1960s. Thus, in our intersectional approach to psychedelic studies, we must confront the harm the war on drugs has waged through racial violence, classist oppression, and political repression. In our research into the histories and presence of psychedelics, we must resist this myth of exceptionalism due to the whiter and more affluent user population that has been drawn to psychedelics in recent years. With that said, the least of us any of us can do is support organizations working to end the war on drugs that still wages on, namely the Drug Policy Alliance, who is doing crucial work on federal decriminalization, descheduling, and harm reduction, along with our local friends, the Bay Staters for Natural Medicine, who led the charge to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms and other plant medicines right here in Cambridge and Somerville. It's a very full day, 25 presenters coming in from literally across the world. Given this full schedule, we ask that you hold any questions you might have for panelists until the end of all presentations at each panel. This lineup features scholars and practitioners, as well as all sorts of odd combinations of scholar and practitioner. That said, we invite a posture of curiosity and surprise, where assumptions about anyone's practice are left at the door, a sacred offering to the gods of hybrid and liminal identities. I invite you all to engage thoughtfully with each of our speakers, and also to take time for yourself to process with new acquaintances that you encounter along the way. Our proceedings for the day will close at 6:40, and we encourage you to continue these conversations started here at one of the many watering holes in the neighborhood. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our first keynote address of the day from Dr. Luis Eduardo Luna. Luis Eduardo was born in Florencia, Colombia. He has a BA from Universidad Complutense de Madrid, an interdisciplinary master's from Oslo University, and a PhD from the Department of Comparative Religion at Stockholm University. He's an associate of the Botanical Museum of Harvard University and assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology of Santa Catarina Federal University in Florianópolis, Brazil. Besides publications in various journals, Dr. Luna is the author of Vegetalismo, Shamanism Among the Mestizo Population of the Peruvian Amazon, and co-author of Inner Paths to Outer Space, Journeys Through Psychedelics and Other Spiritual Technologies. Dr. Luna has lectured worldwide on indigenous and mestizo shamanism and has been a curator of visionary art exhibits in Europe, Latin America, the United States, and Japan. He's the director of Wasiwaska, a research center for the study of psychointegrator plants, visionary art, and consciousness in Florianópolis, Brazil. And he is currently an honorary research fellow of the Department of Sociology, Philosophy, and Anthropology at the University of Exeter in England. Please join me in welcoming Luis Eduardo Luna.
Okay, thank you very much. A great pleasure and an honor to be here at the Harvard Divinity School. Many people to thank for this event, Paul and Jeffrey and Gosia and Charles, Laurie and Mariam. I have to also mention Christine Hauskeller, who is the director of this group in Exeter University, who is working on neocolonialism and psychedelics and ethics. All right, so I started with 1492, which is the beginning of our world. Felipe Fernández Armesto, he called his book, The Year the World Began, because it's the beginning of a process that would bring peripheral Europe, an Asian peninsula, which center was until the 14th century, the Middle East, to world dominance. So we forget that, say that the old world and the new world, But in fact, in 1492, there were two old worlds that met. And if we think of 2600 BC, we have at the same time Saqqara in Egypt, and we have Caral in Peru. So, so we have, at the same time that we have the cities in Sumer, we have in Chico Norte, We have 32 different cities, some of them with monumental architecture in this world, in the Americas. Abya, which is the name indigenous people call the continent. So between 3,200 and 2,500 BCA, large-scale public buildings, the temple at Huaricanga is 3,200 BC. Among them rose up in at least 7 settlements on the Peruvian coast. When the people of the Norte Chico were building these cities, there was only one other urban complex on Earth, Sumer. So these are the biography when I took this. The other element, which I think is worth thinking about, is what pointed out by Jared Diamond, that the axis of the two continents, Eurasia and the America, it's influenced the exchange of plants and animals. The axis of America has to go through many different zones, and there was the great achievement of the Amerindians was that they were able to use so many different ecosystems in a very extraordinary way, domesticating so many different plants. So here in the Americas, we have 4 independent plant domestication centers, southern Mexico, 9,000 years ago, in the Peruvian Andes, 6,000 years ago, in the middle Mississippi, around 4,000 years ago, and in the Amazon, which is now new data coming out, 10,000 years ago. So we have to think that Amerindians were mostly agriculturalists. If we see this map, based on Denevans, the bright color indicate the places where they were domesticating, they were cultivating plants in the Americas. So, but within 150 years of contact, I have to go back, 150 years of contact, between 95 to 98% of the people in the Americas were exterminated, either violence or diseases. And so what happened was that the abandonment of those large areas caused that the forest came back, and it was a drop in carbon dioxide. So very interesting that in this book by Lewis and Maslin, how we created the Anthropocene, they came to a point in 1610, which is the moment in which there is a decline of carbon dioxide and then begins again. And it was interpreted this as the evidence of post-conquest demographic collapse. This is the work done by my friend Franz Faust, a German anthropologist living in Colombia for many years. So, in fact, here in North America, William Denevan points out that the landscape of 1750 was more pristine, less humanized than that of 1492, where there were cultivations everywhere. And this myth was repeated again with the Amazon. We are going to get there. So the population of the Americas was conservative, about 57 million people. Now the estimates are going up all the way, perhaps 100 million people. So it was really the greatest historical catastrophe, losing that population and all the knowledge which was behind. So if we think of the food consumed today, 3/5 of the food that we consume now comes from the Americas, including, of course, corn, potatoes, and you see in the ceramics representations of many of these plants. So corn, and there are thousands of varieties of corn. Potatoes, I was recently in Cochabamba, and in the market, and you see, so many different potatoes, and they are complaining, oh, now we only use something like 15, 20 varieties. There are hundreds of them, not used any longer. The same with corn. There are something like 400 different varieties, of manioc. So And the markets, whenever you go to the markets in Latin America, this is the greatest pleasure is to see all this variety of food, which is the work of the Amerindians. And then in the Encyclopedia Bernardino de Sahagún, you see also the many different medicinal plants used. So we have the famous Colombian exchange in which all these plants went to Europe and Africa, and then we got back just a few wheat, rice, sugar, bananas, grapefruits, citruses. That's what we got. And then in the Americas, there were only few domesticated animals. The guajolote, what is in English now? the turkey. This is our turkey. Well, he died last year, 17 years old. And the guinea pigs and the llamas. Very few animals were domesticated, and they were restricted to areas. But then from Europe, then we got the pigs, the horses, the cattle, goats, sheep, chickens, and so on. And with them, the diseases, smallpox, typhus, whooping cough, measles, etc., which were related to the domestication of animals. Measles is suspected to have arisen from a rinderpest virus among sheep and goats, smallpox from camel domestication, cowpox bearing rodent ancestor, and influenza from the domestication of waterfowls from some 4,500 years ago. We think not only the Amerindians, the humans, but also that the buffaloes, from 50 million buffaloes went down to 2,000, and this is just one example of the many animals that we lost here in the Americas. And then this book by David Stanner, he's saying, is this Holocaust, when is it going to repeat itself? Can it be repeated? And he said, can it be stopped? Because it's going on today. Still in Brazil, in Colombia, in many places, the indigenous population is being persecuted, their land's being stolen and so on. And this recent book, Rediscovery of America, for me, a great revelation. But now we go to the psychedelics, the sacred plants. So we have so many sacred plants in the Americas. And in fact, I came to the conclusion that we cannot understand Amerindian population without reference to these sacred plants, including the tobacco, of course. So it is everywhere. And this is a map taken from this beautiful book, Shamanic Visions Outside of Time, that was published recently by the Museo Chileno de Arte Precolombino in Santiago. So we have the use of sacred plants goes all the way, San Pedro cactus, 8,600 BC, and then we have coca, corn beer as well, cacao, peyote, anaeranthera, tobacco, amanitas, brumancia, ilex mate, ilex paraguayensis, ribea corimbosa, ololiuki, ilex huellosa datura, etc. So we have very ancient use of these plants. Of course, we all know the Chabin famous representation of the San Pedro cactus, and then in Texas here and in Mexico, you found peyote going back 4,000 before Christ, and then being used today still by the Huichol, the Tarahumara, the Cora, and many other indigenous groups in Mexico, with beautiful, iconography and rituals to the conservation of our planet. So, for instance, the peyote, an elder from the community of San Andres Cojamiata, Hikuri, the peyote, is the great teacher who guides us. Through Hikuri, we know ourselves. We connect with nature and the gods. Hikuri manifests itself in the voice of the Kauyumari deer who tell us what to do, whom to remember, and to worship. It unites us with our past, our family, and our spouse. From it, we learn art, songs, ceremonies, and the offerings that we must make. It has always been there to guide us, to remind us who we are and who we should always be. And of course, the use of coca is very ancient as well. I think it's about 10,000 years. And this book, I'm sorry, I transferred it up and down. This is by Luis Cayón, a Colombian anthropologist, who, working with the Macuna in Colombia, he came to the conclusion coca is used by the Macuna to understand things better, so that it enables to have an appropriate and healthy system of human behavior, so deeply connected with ethics. In Tiwanaku in Bolivia, we have this extraordinary pre-Incan culture, and it was through the work of Chilean anthropologist Manuel Torres from Florida International University, working in northern Chile, which is one of the driest places on earth, was able to find out, discover that this strange paraphernalia used in Bolivia was in fact related to the paraphernalia of the use of an Aderanthera colubrina. They found about 25% of the bundles, found they were having this paraphernalia, showing how deeply important was the Aderanthera colubrina, Seville, in the Tiwanaku culture. Here you have the whole paraphernalia, and even they were able to make some chemical studies and found still bufotenin in some of these seeds. So here you have in northern South America, in the Caribbean, a related plant, an Aderanthera peregrina, was used. And in fact, the very first book written in the Americas on European language in Spanish was about about the use of cojoba, which was the Aderanthera peregrina. So very interesting that the first book on the European language was about a sacred plant. And of course, we all know the cacao, what we will do without chocolate. No? But then recently it was found out that cacao was not really originally from Mexico and Central America. It was an Amazonian plant. And that is something that we will get later on to see the importance of the Amazon in domestication of many different plants. Okay, so now we go to the Amazon. And of course, we all know the Amazon, this huge biological diversity with 2.5 million insect species, 4,000 plant species, trees, fish, birds, etc. But when we don't think much is that also the Amazon, the cultural diversity of the Amazon. We have, linguistically, is one of the richest areas in the world with 350 languages from at least 6 major linguistic families. We think of Europe, it's mostly Indo-European, except for Basque and Estonia, Hungary, Finnish. And then, most interesting, around 50 different isolates. Plants we have no relationship with other plants. What happened there, what was happening in the Amazon, is something that will gradually be being discovered. So we have, this idea of the Amazon was like, pristine forest, the same idea that you had here in North America. It is just going away. The Amazon was in fact populated. Perhaps 20 million people were living there. There were cities, or different kinds of cities with like networks, 3,000 to 4,000 people and networks and so on. The geoglyphs or earthworks were found in Brazil, hundreds of them. And then this is recently in the Bolivian Amazon, finding sites. I think that I have a description. 2 of the urban centers each covered an area of more than 100 hectares, 3 times the size of Vatican City. The LiDAR images reveal wall compounds with broad terraces rising 6 meters above the ground. Conical pyramids made of earth tower above one end of the terraces. And I was talking to Jose Iriarte from my university, Exeter University. They said they have probably, just discovered 5%. So we have a huge network of ancient cities between approximately 500 BC common area and 300. The Quilamope and later the Upano culture, this came out just very recently, a few weeks ago, it was published, began to build mounds and set their houses on earthen platforms. This platform would be organized around the low square plaza. So here we are in the Upano Valley in Ecuador, and the huge complexes, urban societies, 2,500 years old, 1,000 years older than any other city in the Amazon, between 10,000 and 100,000 people, a city as large as London in Roman times, interconnected, roads 100 meters and 25 kilometers long, houses, square temples, etc. So when Orellana went down the Amazon, the Napo River, and came to the Amazon without knowing how big the continent was, and he had the friar Carvajal, he was writing what he was seeing. He was writing about these roads and these cities on both sides of the river. And the manuscript was lost for about 100, 200 years and so on. And when it was discovered again, they thought these are fantasies of Carvajal, you know. This is not true, impossible. Later on, when La Condamine went to the Amazon, he wrote, you know, the Amazon was nearly, you know, empty of population. Of course, in the Amazon happened the same that happened everywhere else, with 98% of the population dead. We have extraordinary examples of very sophisticated ceramics in Marajó, in Santarém, in Brazil. And then this book was a classic in 2001. Unknown Amazon. Now Jose Iriarte was telling me that he hopes to write the continuation 20 years later, you know, with all this new material that is coming out. And of course, one of the main factors was the terra preta do indio, the black soil, which is anthropogenic. And in the Amazon, when you take out the big trees, the topsoil is very thin, you know, just a few centimeters, and it washes away when there are rains and it becomes a desert. But in many areas in the Amazon, you have this terra preta, sometimes 2 meters deep, of very fertile soil. And if you put all this together, it said that it could be the size of the whole of France, you know, of absolutely extraordinary soil. And in fact, the Amazon was one of I think perhaps the only place on Earth in which when the civilization died out, what was left was better than it was before. I mean, we think of Sumer, you know, the whole Western, you know, civilization is about destroying, you know, the Romans destroyed the soil, the Greeks did the same, Plato was complaining about that, etc. The Amazon, quite the opposite. In fact, the Amazon was an anthropogenic forest with huge diversity created by Amazonians. You know, here another 4,700 artificial forest islands believed to be built gradually by humans, speckled the seasonally flooded llanos of Mojos in Bolivia. When the region floods, these islands remain above the water. So early humans in the Amazon created thousands of forest islands as they tame wild plants. The research confirmed that this part of the Amazon is one of the earliest centers of plant domestication in the world. They cultivated manioc 10,000 years ago, squash 10,250, corn 6,850 years ago. In fact, corn is also Amazonian. You know? So this is Jose Iriarte in his office, and he has been working lately with the iconography of La Lindosa in Colombia. They found Huerequeteque rock paintings, 13 kilometers long, you know, with paintings, and in La Lindosa. And this is perhaps the very first example we have of visionary art, you know, in the Amazon, the oldest visionary art, or one of the oldest. And Jose, he said that he even found a seed of an Anandra peregrina, probably 2,000 years old. But anyway, so it is possible that all this is really related to the theme of this conference, you know, with the sacred plants. And so if we put together Chiribiquete in Colombia, the Upano Valley in Ecuador, earthworks in Acre, Mojos in Bolivia, Santarém, Marajón, you'll see that, you know, the Amazon, and we don't know what is inside, in between, because, of course, it's very difficult. All these other plants were dated because they are found in dry places, but the Amazon is very wet. It's very difficult to have organic material. Okay, now we go to the anthropology. Philippe Descola also became aware of the degree of manipulation of the plants out of the garden was enormous, of the achuari. He was working with the achuari in Ecuador. Each garden not only had a number of cultivated plants, but also of plants that were transplanted from the forest. This manipulation of plants meant that the forest was, in fact, due to the cyclical nature of the Sweden agriculture, regularly transformed by this and became progressively something like a macro garden. There was not a raw nature, which a raw society would adapt to, which is the normal way of thinking, but a very complicated process of co-evolution between humans and non-humans in very long term. So the other thing that, is that perhaps the Amazonians were the greatest specialists in a state of consciousness, given that so many different plants are found in the Amazon. And many of those plants we don't even know. I was talking to a Purinang shaman about this plant. He said, well, we have our plants we don't tell anything about, because the gringos will come here and then, start to take our thing. So there are probably many other sacred plants used by indigenous people, which we don't know at all. Of course, in the Amazon, we have evidence of Anaeranthera peregrina, cojoba, that I told you, yopo, we call it in the Amazon. And then, of course, the many varieties of tobacco, and then brugmansias, toe, calling, the Curupita genesis that makes you dream. Caliandra angustifolia is used as an admixture plant to ayahuasca, and Brunfelsia grandiflora by itself. When I was doing my field work in the Amazon, I found something like 70 different admixture plants to ayahuasca, but then nowadays there are something like 200. In fact, there is an ongoing experimentation. My focus has been for many, many years since I took the first time yahe 50 years ago. So it has been ayahuasca, or let's say Banisteriopsis capi, which is the main plant, and then which is known, this is beautiful flowers of Banisteriopsis capi, which is known as yahe when the admixture plant is Diplopterus cabrerana, or ayahuasca when the admixture plant is Psychotria viridis rubeacea. But these are just the tip of the iceberg. There are many, many different varieties. And here you have more or less, the distribution of yahe and ayahuasca. In Colombia, mostly use yahe in parts of Ecuador, and ayahuasca in Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia. I was born in the Amazon. Well, at least it was the Amazon, because when in Florencia, when I was born, there was no running water, no electricity. So thinking about the Anthropocene, I went from candle and ink, to computer, in my lifetime. So, but that area was all signed by cattle, and this is some years later in Florencia. So the whole area of Caquetá was completely destroyed by cattle. So I say I'm not any longer Amazonian because there is no Amazon there in this area. Anyway, I was going to be a priest when my parents had this idea, sent me a seminar. So when I was 18 years old, I was sent to Spain. And I lived, I was 2.5 years in northern Spain in 2 different monasteries. It was good. I learned Latin and Greek, and but I left the monastery after 2.5 years, and then stayed in Madrid, where I took my first degree in Latin American literature. In 1971, something happened to me very important. It was meeting in a bar. I went for holidays to see my parents, and then I met Terence. He was 5 months older than me, and then he was trying to get something to eat, and then I came. I said the magic sentence, "May I help you?" That changed my life. So we stayed 2 months together. He was introducing me to all these ideas about plants and so on. My parents had a little house near Florencia, where we took, he introduced me to Santa Marta gold, the cannabis. I never, when I was living in Spain, in the seminar, and then in Spain, Franco time, so I have no idea about all these things, So when he said, I'm going to, try this grass, So, okay, this is cannabis. So I say, okay, fine, If he had said marijuana, I would say, oh, no, But cannabis, so I had a big, anyway, in Madrid, I was already lost my faith, I was all came to a new faith, militant atheist, But that Santa Marta gold, changed my life completely, I say, okay, there is something else. And so I recovered some sort of spirituality, which is what and then we took Yahe as well. I knew Apolinaria Canamijoy, who was an Ingano shaman who was from Mocoa, went to the Caquetá area. I went very often to the pension when he used to live, and we took Yahe that he had prepared, but he was not there. So I became very, very interested and said, okay, I want to know what is Yahe. And so I went to see him. If you want to learn about Yahé, you have to come with me, keep a certain diet, take 40 nights, and then he will come. He said, how is he? You know, he's a little man, he's simpatico. So, but I was not able to stay in Colombia. I went then to Norway. I was teaching Latin American literature at Oslo University. And then in 1973, I went to see Terence in Berkeley. And all these books are already out. Of course, it was Carlos Castañeda at the time, The Teachings of Don Juan, the Yahé letters. But then very interesting books came out, you know, Wizard of the Upper Amazon, about Manuel Córdoba Ríos, and Michael Harner, Hallucinogens and Shamanism, The Way of the Shaman, came also that year in Flesh of the Gods, you know, the great anthology by Peter Faust, which really is like a fantastic introduction if you want to get into this field. And then Amazonian Cosmos by Rachel Dolmatov. Terence gave me this book. And then I realized the importance of Capi, but instead of Capi, Emon de Tucano. And Rachel Dolmatov was the first one to point out the tremendous importance of Capi in the iconography, in the narratives, in the mythology of the Tucano Indians. And he did it while he was in Bogota working with only one person, Agustin Guzman, who was a Desana, who spoke several indigenous languages. He spoke perfect Spanish. He even knew how to write phonetic script because he had been learning in the linguistic, with the Summer Linguistic Institute, etc. You know, the ideal informant, let's put it this way. The book should be published by both of them, and both names should be there. And then Rachel Dolmatov later went to the Tucano, wrote this book, Beyond the Milky Way, and then he realized that all the iconography there in the Tucano is all related to the experiences. According to the Tucano, all the graphic art of the culture is derived from images seen during the Yahé hallucinations. In fact, the drawings that decorate the outer walls of their houses, the decoration of pottery and other utilitarian or ritual objects, and many other artistic manifestations are said to be inspired by the designs and colors observed during these visions. These motifs form a veritable code that is repeated in decorative art, giving a profound significance to the various decorative forms of the culture. In fact, you know, he gave a paper and pencil to the Tucano, and they they made these drawings, and then he got the description. So I found out that really there is a lot of information here in this. For me, this was a very important book because of what I'm going to say later. So, and the other idea that he got is that during a collective Yahé ritual, it is said that the individual dies when he drinks the potion, and that now his spirit returns to the uterine regions of the beyond, only to be reborn there and to return to his ordinary existence on this earth when the trance is over. I found the same idea in David Kopanawa. I used to say that if you want to read one book about Amazonian anthropology, this is the book, you know, The Falling Sky by David Kopanawa, extraordinary Yanomami elder. It was published first in French and then now in Portuguese and in Italian. And he said in this book, I did not learn to think about the things of the forest by setting my eyes on paper skins, books. I saw them for real by drinking my eldest breath of life with the yacoana powder they gave me. And this yacoana powder is Virola longialata, which contains 5-methoxy-DMT. And he talks about having the drinking, you know, it's now the yacoana is dying, you know, you have to learn how to die. Very different from, you know, the settings in the, you know, where you have three people, you're in a very comfortable sofa and, you know, three people taking care of you, you know, here you have to die, you know, you have to go. So I just came from Carnival, you know, Brazil, you know that during Carnival, it's 5 days of frenzy, you know, the whole country stops. And David Kopanawa was one of the, in the Carnival, and there was a whole school dedicated to the Yanomami, and David was there, you know. So it was an extraordinary event to have such a person in the Carnival. Okay, anyway, 1979, I was teaching in Oslo, but I never got a permanent position. I was studying mathematics and chemistry. Raisa Dolmatov wrote to me, if you are interested in these things, you better learn hard science before you get into anthropology, because you get very confused. I did that, but then my colleagues in Oslo, they didn't like it. I was teaching literature, so I never got a permanent position. So I said, I have to get out from this country. And I got a position in Finland, in Helsinki, 1979, to teach Spanish. That was the only job I got. But then, by my surprise, I got a position that was that Rafael Carsten was having. He was a Swedish-Finnish scholar who wrote the first book about Natem, ayahuasca. When he was I forgot the name, the Achuar, the Jibar. I don't like to use that word. In Ecuador, they have another name. Anyway, so very interesting that I just got that position. And once I got this job, for the first time, I was paid during my summer holidays. So I wanted to see my continent, went to South America, following in a way without knowing the path of Che Guevara, went all the way to Iquitos, and then I went to Colombia, and then I went to see Apolinar. And I had my second Yahe experience. These other 7 years I was studying whatever I couldn't to understand what is this business of sacred plants and so on. So I took the Yahe, had an extraordinary experience and then what I realized is that I've been so focused on Europe. Europe is the cradle of civilization, of thought, philosophy, and everything. And I have completely forgotten the Amerindian epistemology, which is a completely different way of seeing the world. So I asked him, Apolinar, why do you take Yahe, to see all those animals out there? So it's about connection with the environment and so on, and many other things. Okay, so I thought to make a film about Apolinar and his family, but he died before I was able to go back there. Went to see Terence again in California, and then he said, I've heard about use of ayahuasca in Peru, you should have a look. So I went there, and then I met Don Emilio Andrade Gomez, who became my teacher. I made a film about him that you can find it on YouTube. You put my name and Don Emilio and his little doctors. You will see, and I think that this is the very first film on ayahuasca. It's a 27 documentary. So recorded the way he prepared ayahuasca, the healing, and so on. And but the most important for me, so it was some of the people went there just to see the jungle television, they call it, but of course, then he was telling me, okay, the plants, sometimes he was healing a person. He said, you have to put these two plants together because the plants know each other. And then again, the question, why do you take ayahuasca, Don Emilio, is to clarify your mind and to strengthen your body. Completely different, of visions. It's not visions are not so important. I want to say, the ayahuasca experience very often is to diagnose or to see the spirits, but not to see how beautiful, is to ask them practical, how can I heal this person, what plant to use, etc., which is very different from the Western point of view of, visions. And so, for him, health and wisdom are two sides of the same coin. So, most important of all, he said, ayahuasca is a doctor, Toe is a doctor, tobacco is a doctor. So the idea of plant teachers. So all these are beings, that he communicate with. At the same time, Jean-Pierre Chomel, a French anthropologist, was working in the Yagua, and he wrote this book, Va Savoir Pouvoir, and he also found out, that the plants are l'unique chemin de la connaissance, the only path of knowledge. So for me, it was the discovery, 5 minutes, of plant shamanism, and which is a very old idea. In the 17th century, a letter of a San Franciscan priest wrote that brugmancia used for divination with diabolic intent. It is called borrachera, floripondio, campana, given that the flower looks like one. They use them to cure persistent illness, and either they get healthy or die with it. It also used to become maestro. So the idea of plant teachers is already there, and learn the art of witchcraft. So the other thing that I discovered is animism, of course. He was putting some plants in this toad and put it in so that it will protect the house where he was healing. When he introduced me to Jose Corral and preparing ayahuasca, and the ayahuasca was bubbling, and he said, "You see these bubbles? These are people as well." I was interested in the whole process. And so I convinced 2 young people to do the diet, and take ayahuasca, and I did it myself, but they gave up after a few days, so I was the only one who did the diet, And Jose Corral was then healing 2 ladies, and so I learned about the whole process. So in '84, I published The Concept of Plant as Teachers among 4 mestizo shamans of Iquitos, northern Peru. It was then translated into German, Spanish, and French. And my book, Vegetalismo, was my doctoral dissertation, which was later published in a beautiful edition in the Czech Republic. And with Dennis, we started to collect plants for the botanical dimension, thanks to, once Schultes called me and said, "Luis Eduardo, I'm sending you a magic carpet." What are you talking about? And I got a Harvard card, the red card, and thanks to that card, I was able to take some plants to Hawaii, to the ethnobotanical dimension. And he introduced me to Pablo Amaringo in Pucallpa, in the Ucayali River. And I met Pablo. He had been a vegetalista, and then he showed me these beautiful watercolors that he had made. And he said, "I remember everything I have seen." So I said, "Okay, do you remember the visions you had when you were taking ayahuasca?" I said, "I do." And so this is the kind of work he did before I met him. So yes, this is the very first ayahuasca painting. I took it to Helsinki. I took a photocopy of it, and asked, "What is this? What is this?" And I got a whole description, 2 pages description of everything there with names and all this. I said, "My goodness, this is a golden mine of information." So I did like Rashid Matub did with the Desana, So I started to collaborate, send him art materials and all that, and all this material came out. What they are talking about, the Sachamama, the Yakumama, the Waira Mama, all this, which is in the local population, they all know about this, or the Yachai, which is the flame that the shamans use to extract illness or to keep darts in order to harm people. The cities under the water, the transformation of dolphins into human beings to seduce women, or the other way around, and so on. So started a collaboration and I realized, how this guy, humble man in the Amazon, who had this huge picture of the world, Of course, the Amazon is not this isolated place, the rivers are highways, So the ideas get there. And then you have this, the distinction of nature and culture, what the Descola say, there is no distinction, the forest is a city, is all culture. So we published this book in 1991, and according to his description, footnotes, and then Stefan Beyer, he said that ayahuasca has slowly been working its way into the popular awareness of the world outside the Amazon for about 20 years. We can, in fact, date the beginning of that awareness with unusual precision to the 1991 publication of the beautifully produced book, Ayahuasca Visions, a collection of vibrant paintings by former shaman Pablo Amaringo, depicting visions he had received during his years of practice as an ayahuasquero, accompanied by his own explanation of each painting and the annotations of anthropologists. Eduardo, do I have 2 minutes or? Yes, all right, okay, so I have too much material. Anyway, so I discovered the same idea of plant teacher when I was in the Sibundoy Valley working with the Kamsa and the Ingano. So I met Salvador Chindoy Schultes. I had been working with him and met his son, Miguel Chindoy. And then Miguel had an apprentice, a mestizo. This is the garden around his place. And he said, okay, this is the garden of science. So all these plants, the same idea, And then I was working with the Shipibo in Santa Rosa de Piracocha. I spent another month taking ayahuasca, doing the diet, and I was, of course, interested in the plants. You know, the Shipibo are famous for the iconography in the ceramics and the clothing, and so and Don Basilio said, you know, if you know the song of a plant, you don't need the plant. So the song, you have the same effect. You know, the idea of the song is the quintessence, you know, effective for the healing. So there was another discovery of mine. Achuar, Philippe Descola, saying that the indigenous people are all the time singing. The songs were addressed from the heart to the heart of the addressee. The idea was to influence the behavior of the entity addressed by these songs. So the communication with plants is through songs, and very often through dreams as well. I will not have the time, you know, but anyway, I'm just going to finish soon. I was interested in the diet, so I wanted to do, what are they talking about? So I spent some time also in isolation, taking with the Ashaninka. He gave me tobacco and psychotria, and my idea was to learn about Brugmansia, but he got a job, he was well paid, and he abandoned me, so I never learned about Brugmansia. So and then just I'm going to finish with this because I have too much material. When Pablo, you know, I started to give the materials to Pablo. One of the kids started to do paintings as well, landscapes, and then another kid came, and another one said, "My goodness, let's create a school." So we created the Usco Ayar School of Painting, and this was a tremendous success. It was free of charge. I gave all the materials. And I realized that the Amazonian people have this extraordinary eidetic memory, because the way Pablo was teaching, it was that they will not copy, you know. They will see the forest, internalize the images, and then project on paper. This school was for the poor kids in the vicinity, was free of charge and all that, and it grew and grew, so soon we have 50, 60 kids, then it came all the way to, you know, and portraits of plants, you know, and so we have 300 kids, and then it became too much for me, you know, because, you know, I said I dedicated 5 years of my life to this school, organizing exhibitions and all that, and then I went back to anthropology, and this some of the kids wanted to paint visions. Pablo was not so keen on that, you know. But anyway, this is Anderson de Bernardi, a Peruvian artist. He's now extraordinary artist, doing exhibitions all over the world. He was doing, of course, natural paintings, and each plant is absolutely, you know, botanists can immediately recognize them, but at the same time doing the visionary work. And of course, you know, we're talking about DMT, the visions, you know, this is what the Western people were very interested in. So in fact, now some of the kids now are artists, and if you go to Pucallpa is kind of like the mecca of visionary art, you know, and a Swiss friend is doing exhibitions in many European countries, in big places, and I was in Ocala in Florida, an exhibition organized by Scott Olsen, who bought many of the paintings. And now, right now, in Paris, in the Musée du Quai Branly, you can see an exhibition of visionary art. It goes all the way to the May 26th, you know, so perhaps you should go there. So in a way, you know, this project started like this, and now the project continues with other people doing something similar. Okay, so I think that I better stop here. All right, thank you very much.
We've got a little bit of time here for some questions. Our next panel, just to let you know, will be starting at 10:30. So if you need a quick break, bathroom, the coffee is still out here, perhaps a quick snack. But Luis Eduardo can take a couple questions before we start our next panel. We have a mic in the audience. See a hand here. And a mic will come, yeah, a mic will come to you.
Okay. Luis, thank you so much. Alex Gearin here from the University of Hong Kong.
Okay.
You mentioned in your talk how indigenous practitioners would approach the altered state as a way of gaining information on which plant to use as a diagnosis, or and there's plenty of other examples of these more practical or pragmatic approaches to sacred psychedelic plants. In your long career, have you come across many non-indigenous people or approaches that are also kind of instrumental, or where ayahuasca is being used not simply for the wondrous and dazzling visions, but for really practical worldly affairs?
Yes. Benny Shannon, who wrote this book, Antipodes of the Mind, which is a phenomenological analysis of the visions, he said that ayahuasca somehow improves performance of any kind, So when I was doing my work with the Barquilla, I didn't have the time to show this, they use ayahuasca in order to facilitate the incorporation of spirits, mediumship. But then the UDV, which a completely different, they also use ayahuasca, they use it for the word, the mystery of the word, to be able to put your words, well. And Benny Shannon, he said it himself, with ayahuasca, suddenly he could, he played the piano much better. And I met a wrestler who, after ayahuasca, was able to beat a lot of people, because of how focused. So I think that it improves performance. So it can be used not only for the wandering, but also in a practical ways. And I wonder, it's, yeah, all right. One.
In the modern era, as Catholics are beginning to rediscover that our Bible contains not only cannabis, cannabisum in Hebrew, but even visionary fungi, like in the chapter 4 of the book of Ezekiel. Have you considered reintegrating your Catholic roots with your shaman, visionary plant and fungus work?
Personal, yes. Well, nowadays, I personally, I prefer animism to any religion, and I think that animism is like a common ground. You can be Buddhist, Hinduist, any, and because animism is not it's not ideology, it's not a religion. It is based on practicality. It is based on observation. It's just a relationship, So I prefer that kind of approach nowadays. And we have this project in Florianopolis, with my wife, a Brazilian wife, and we have now about over 400 species of plants. And my religion now is the garden, the garden, and all the beings are coming to the garden. The birds and the reptiles, they are coming to the garden. So that's, that's for me right now more important than words and dogmas and this kind of thing. But anyway. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Eduardo. Greetings from a friend in Iquitos, Patty Webster, who runs Amazon Promise and is a big friend of Dona Maringo. But I was so interested in your point that a song could be an essence of a plant. Can you say a little bit more about how information might be encoded through a text or through a non-semantic kind of vehicle of performance?
Well, that's what they say, that everything has an Icaro. By the way, Icaro, not Icaro. Somebody is to introduce Icaro. It's not Icaro, it's Icaro, because there is a verb Icarar, which is to blow tobacco and give energy to anything. So they say that everything has a song. Everything that exists. And in fact, indigenous people, they all the healing is about songs, any of these Amazonian people, it's just about the songs, the Shipibo, the Ashuar, etc., So there is, for me, a mystery. Of course, when this idea of even the Shipibo iconography, it was Angelika Gebhardt-Sayer, a German anthropologist, who said that she discovered the musicality in these designs, And then, of course, it was exaggerated, like it was coded, you know, like a partiture. It's not like that. The iconography is musicality, but it doesn't mean that it's this particular. That is our Platonistic, you know. I said, okay, this is it, you know. They don't think in this way, you know. Yeah, completely different, you know. So, yeah.
And we have one question. I think this will be our last for our session from our online participants. Elisa, wondering about your opinion about the Western interest toward ayahuasca. Do you think the commodification of ayahuasca is the solution to protect the indigenous contexts and avoid the drug tourism?
Well, this, you know, the globalization of ayahuasca is a double edge, you know. So a lot of people have been learning there, you know, been transformed their lives, you know. I know some business people who suddenly, you know, leave all that and getting interested in gardening, in other things, you know. But at the same time, it has become a business for many people. In fact, when I was in Iquitos in the 1980, there was not such a thing as retreat center. There was nothing. I mean, as far as I know, I was the first one who was doing the diet and all this, you know. Nowadays, if you go to Iquitos, there are 150 centers, you know, many of them run by Americans, and becoming a big business, you know. So it's a double edge, you know, double edge. At the same time, I'm worried about that many of these centers do not plant, you know. And so one of the things that we are doing in Wasiwaska Center is finding ways to cultivate ayahuasca vertically with fast-growing trees. And in fact, the ayahuasca produce a lot of biomass. So if you plant vertically, you know, you can recuperate soils, and then within these places, you can spaces, you can put other trees, you know. So in fact, I think that ayahuasca, used correctly, it can be really a factor for the recuperation of poor soil, especially cattle, you know, destroyed by cattle. So it's a double thing, you know, like everything, you know. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, thank you.
Sponsor, Center for the Study of World Religions.
Copyright 2024, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.